So hello, today I'm at St Mary Magdalene Church in Great Burstead in Essex. I'd like to talk to you about the history of the church and the village itself. So Great Burstead is a village in Essex. It's 1 mile from Billericay and it's 4 miles away from Basildon. Great Burstead is surrounded by rolling Essex farmland. The village joins on to Billericay, which strides the hill above. The elevation here is 50 metres above sea level. The population is 6,000. Nearby Billericay is an extensive historical connection to the Roman period. So it's likely Great Burstead had Roman patrols passing through here. In fact, coins were found from 3 of the Caesars, Trajan, Hadrian and Constantine. But it's the Saxon period where the history really comes alive. Now St Cedd of 653 AD had established the first Christian chapel in Bradwell-on-Sea, and soon after he established a chapel in Tilbury, and he actually brought Christianity to the pagan Saxon kings. Now soon after Cedd made his way inland along the ancient Roman road called Tilbury Road, and Cedd stopped right here and set up a preaching cross, and soon after he was blessing a water well. And if we look here, this is the old village pump for Great Burstead, and the Tilbury Road is just literally on that up that road there. So somewhere in the vicinity here is the original well. You can see the original church there. Now local legend says that the Saxon king Sabert lived here and may even be buried here. For Sabert was the king between 604 and 616, and he was the first East Saxon king to convert to Christianity. He was actually christened by a man called Mellitus, who was the first bishop of London. But soon after Sabert died, his 2 sons reverted back to paganism and drove out Mellitus. King Sabert also set up a church in London, where Westminster Abbey stands today. And we can look at the sign, which shows some of the history. Now during 1066, the lord of the manor here was Ingvar of Burstead, along with 28 freemen. For after the Romans left, the Saxons decided that Burstead was more suited to them, as being on a gentle slope with streams and no Roman cemeteries nearby. The land around Burstead Church was fortified by them into a burh, which is a ditch enclosure, and the name Burstead means fortified homestead. Now by 1086 the Normans had firmly established Burstead. It had 118 households been recorded, and it was in fact one of the largest of settlements in all of England. Bishop Odo of Bayeux was not only the tenant-in-chief here, but also lord of the manor. And Burstead itself was the actual capital manor, so you can guarantee that Odo was here. Now before the conquest, Odo had no land in England, but after the conquest he owned 575 manors. Now Burstead had 24 plough teams and 4 slaves, showing immense wealth here. Later Odo would go on to be imprisoned for fraud, and he spent 5 years in jail. On release his lands had been already taken by the crown. Bishop Odo actually went on to the first crusade to Palestine, and he actually died en route in 1087. Now by 1147 the lordship belonged to the Cistercian monks of the Abbey of Stratford Langthorne, and it's most likely in my mind that the 28 freemen of Ingvar of Burstead were in fact monks. And it's also likely that the monks were from the time of St Cedd, but there's no proof of this. Now in Burstead Church, where we stand now, stands a Crusader's chest from the 12th century. It's most probable that Richard the Lionheart of 1189, around that time, nearby Mount Nessin, also had the Knights Hospitalia of this period, and we shall look at this more closely later. Now by 1338 the River Thames had flooded the Stratford Abbey, and all the monks there were moved to this location, and it would remain here until 1551, until the dissolution of the monasteries of Henry VIII. Now in 1381 the Peasants Revolt had taken place in nearby Brentwood. Their leader was Wat Tyler. He was executed in London, and 500 of the Essex men made their way back to Billericay, to nearby Norsey Woods. The king's men were in pursuit and swiftly killed all of the 500. They captured 700 horses, and this would become known as the Battle of Norsey Woods of 1381. Now in June or early July of that year, the 500 men were buried here in these very grounds of this ancient woodland. Now in the 100 Years' War between France and England, it was compulsory for men of age to practice archery every Sunday, and South Green, which is nearby to here, was where they practiced. The yew tree was in fact the tree of choice to fabricate the longbow, that famous longbow. Now Great Burstead's yew tree is the oldest in Essex. It's possibly been between 750 and 1,000 years old. It's probable that the bows used at Agincourt by Henry V's archers were actually made from this tree in 1415. Now between 1455 and 1487, branches of yew trees were cut down, this time for the internal War of the Roses, the English War. This was during the Tudor period. Now in the time of Queen Mary, 5 locals were martyred. We have Thomas Watts, a local wholesaler and draper, and he refused to pray at this very church. This was under the Bishop of Bona, or Bishop Bona. He was condemned to death and he was burned at the stake on the 9th of June 1555. This was at Chelmsford. Now his wife, Mary, would live another 44 years, and she is buried under this very yew. Now only 27 years later, Christopher Martin would be born here in 1582. By 1606, Martin would marry Mary Prower in this very church. Martin would go on to become the church warden here in 1611. Now it was Christopher Martin who would become the Mayflower ship's governor and purchasing agent. He was responsible for buying the Mayflower's cargo and supplies. Now Christopher, Mary and stepson Solomon and the servant John Langmore would all live and worked around here. The Mayflower boarded, they boarded the Mayflower 1620. Sadly, none of them survived the first winter, but were part of that very most famous period in American history. Now, by 1582, Great Burstead, like so many parts of Essex, was under the suspicion of witchcraft. And it seems that even flat beer being served could be blamed, for Agnes Byron of Burstead was found guilty of bewitching 20 brewings of beer. Now, by 1630, a new wave of pilgrims left from Burstead and Billericay on over 100 ships in the next 13 years. And they would colonise Massachusetts in America, many residents coming from Essex. Now, London was ravaged by the Black Death of 1665. For September of that year was the height of the Great Plague. And here in Burstead Cemetery, where we stand, we have a John Reeve of London from the 8th of September 1665. For Billericay was actually a major wool centre and would trade with London. Many a draper lived here. It's most likely John was a draper as well. And what's most unusual about this is it's got a headstone on either side. So it's most likely that the stonemason perhaps made an error. Now, moving on to the fascinating Georgian period, the time of flintlock pistols and outlaws. And the roads here in 1737 were described as this: the ruts of incredible depth, and the trees grow everywhere overgrown. For this was the time of the highwayman, and once the sun set, it was best to keep off the roads. Essex had its own highwayman, it was Dick Turpin. And many a local legend exists of Turpin and his gang riding these lanes. Now, Dick Turpin and his gang would often hide in such places as churchyards. And in nearby Durham, Turpin rode his horse Black Bess up a flight of stairs in a property to take refuge. Today, many pubs still carry his name. Now, many a pub once stood in Great Burstead, and once the Three Horseshoes pub stood directly to the side of Great Burstead Church, which we're looking at now. In the 1760s, it changed its name so as not to clash with another pub in Billericay. Today, the pub is a private dwelling. Now, around midday on a Sunday, the church warden would order the church sexton to ring the church bell, and the church wardens, carrying this stick of authority, would have entered this pub, the Three Horseshoes, and he would have cleared everybody out. Today, the landlords across England, they still ring the pub bell and they will shout, "Last orders, gentlemen, last orders." It's quite a spectacle. I've always found it of an interest how these pubs are so close to churches. Now, today's pub, which is not far from here, the Duke of York and the King's Head, stand close by. In fact, a local militia was raised during the Napoleonic Wars, and it's where the Duke of York gets its name from. Nearby Billericay had a military garrison from this time, so it's likely the soldiers would have drank here. Several miles away, Napoleon Bonaparte's warhorse, Marengo, had actually been captured and brought over in 1815 by the 11th Baron Peter from the Battle of Waterloo. You never know, it could have ridden this area itself. Now, on the 24th of September 1916, a Super Zeppelin L32 crashed within walking distance of here. The German Zeppelin flew over Billericay High Street, just missing it. crashed in flames at nearby Greens Farm Lane, killing all 21 of the crew, including Captain Werner Peterson, the Zeppelin captain. 2 days later, the crew were escorted by the Royal Flying Corps and buried with full military honours right here where I stand now. And they would stay interned here until 1966. The crew were then moved to Staffordshire for the German military war graves, and they would be buried with 3 other Zeppelin crews. And if you look here, you can still see the outline of the mass grave of 21. And through the tree line there, this is where the local population would have come to view the burial. Now, World War II had hit Great Burstead as well. A V1 rocket damaged the Bull's Head pub in 1945, and also the Plough pub. Now, the Plough today is the doctor's surgery. In 1955, the ancient parish of Great Burstead became Basden District, and a year later, a cricket team was formed. Now today, the village has an area called South Green, where the ancient archers once practised for Agincourt. Now today there's a row of 10 shops and a petrol station. So the West Tower where we're standing now is 14th century, and it's 14 foot square from the late 14th century period. It's built in 3 stages, and it's got an embattled parapet at the top. We can zoom up there. Now it's got a timber spire on there. Now if you look at the spire on the top, in 2020, Storm Eunice, the weather vane was actually blown off and it impaled itself on the lawn below. The church is fundraising to repair the shingles which are perished. But if you look there on the top, you can see the lead work is twisted over. So now we're standing at the south porch, built in the early 16th century. It's got the original heavy oak timber frame and ornate carvings, built at the same time as the north porch. You can see the original wall plates there. Now the actual south doorway, which is in front of us here, this is 15th century. Now if you look on the south door jamb, you can actually see the original scratch dial, which would have been used for mass. If you follow it down here, there's a further dial there. Now if we look at this door, this is the original oak overlapping batten door with trellis framing. And you can see the strap hinges there. This is 15th century, and if you follow it down, you can see the original handles. Got incredible age. Now we're standing in the south aisle, and it's 15 feet wide and it's 15th century. The windows themselves are 14th century, come from the time of the Peasants Revolt. And if you look at the timbers in the roof, they are 16th century. Now we're standing at the font, and this is the early 15th century, which is in the Tudor period. It's got a square octagonal bowl, and this would be the same font that Christopher Martin and his son Nathaniel were baptised. Just think of that. A little peep inside. It's got the original lead liner. Now if we look up there on the south wall, we've got the original medieval wall paintings. So continuing with the wall paintings which cover the south wall, the south aisle, These were uncovered. They were discovered in 1989, so not long ago, where builders were working on the walls. These paintings are dated from 1320 to 1330. And Anne Ballantyne is the conservator. Now what we're looking at here are 3 living and 3 dead. Now the 3 living are said to be actual kings. And one of these in the middle, or it's said in the middle, is the King of Cyprus. Now below, which we're looking at here, is said to be Jesus shows his wounds to St. Thomas. Now if we look here, we've got some exquisite pews. Originally there was 10 of these, and these are from the 15th century. It's an incredible age. They're all of solid oak and have got buttressed ends, each with traced heads, and you can see the exquisite wear. If we look at this board here, you can just see if we look here, it gives you an idea. Incredible. Now we're standing in the nave, which is 44 feet by 23 feet. It's the oldest part of the stone church. And if you look on this wall here, this is 12th century. This would be from the Crusaders period. Now if we look here, we've got the original 12th century window. Now a lot of these windows in the wall here, they range from 14th to 16th century. It's actually got 4 bays, these columns coming down, and these are 15th century. Now we're facing the actual north doorway, and this is 15th century, and if we look here, we've got the heads of King and Queen. So this is most likely to be Empress Matilda, and this is most likely to be King Stephen. Now we're standing in the chancel, which is 15th century. It measures 31 by 21 feet. And if you look, you've got the usual floor slabs. You can actually see the original, which is blocked. If you look at some of these floor slabs here, now this one here is Thomas Stokes of 1701, and in 1701 William Kidd the pirate was hanged in London, and Jethro Tull invented a drill to plant seeds in soil. And if we go below it, we have a year later, we have Samuel Fresher of 1702. Now continuing into the chancel, we've got a beautiful stained glass window with Jesus in the centre. And you can see some of the ancient columns there. And this could be the Aubrey, I believe, where they would keep the sacred wine and bread. Now what I also noticed was connection to the Mayflower. We've got these chairs, which looks like they're made in light oak. Whether they're American oak, I'm not sure. And then there's a lovely, like a tapestry. So we're now at the north porch. It's 15th century and it's carved oak, and the outer archway and barge boards are completely original with carved foliage. And if you have a look here, you can see where more recent additions have been added. But you can see the original barge board and see how it goes up. And if we look inside, we can see the king posts. And just think, it's been here this long. Now above, we've got the headstops here, which I guess is possibly Matilda and the king. But if we look above here, we've got we've got squandles carved with annunciation, which is Gabriel the angel holds a scroll. You can just about see that. Or maybe here. So in Latin, that actually reads, Ave Maria, plena Dominus tecum, which is Holy Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Now this plaque on the north wall of the perimeter of the church was fitted in 1995 to mark the 375th anniversary of the Mayflower voyage. It also remembers the church warden Bob Carpenter. Now leaving the nave we go through the original rood section, or where the rood stairs would have been. So it looks like the rood stairs have long been removed. But if you look here, you can see where original arch of some sort would have been. Now what I'd like to talk about is the chest. Now this is a 12th century Crusaders chest. It's hewn from solid oak, so one piece of tree. If you look, it's got 7 hinges. It's incredibly strong. And it's got 3 clasps. Now these 3 clasps, probably the central one, would have been for the priest. You've got the original lock there, additional lock. And these 2 would have been for church wardens. You've got some of the original signs there. And you can see where donation slots been added. Now if you look at the end, you can actually see the way the oak tree's already grown. Now if you look at these two peg holes, it's most interesting for me because I did read that original coffins of this period for people of great wealth and importance would have an oak coffin designed like this, and the lid would be nailed down with oak pegs. I couldn't see any on this corner, so it might not be a coffin. It could well be that these were used for possibly banners, poles to hold a flag. If this is indeed a Crusaders chest, this would be from the time of Richard the Lionheart. Possibly even dating before that to King Stephen and Empress Matilda. So it's incredibly early Norman. Now what we see is the south window, and it shows the Mayflower. It's designed by Matthew Lloyd, Windsor, in the memory of church warden Sammy Norris. It's fitted in 2004. We shall have a closer look. So there's a memorial there. So next to the window depicting the Mayflower, we've got Mary with baby Jesus, and then we've got another ancient wall painting. And you can see the vibrant colours that these churches must have been built in. And this could possibly be a piscina for washing out the vessels. And I guess that underneath here there'd be a drain which would then design for the holy water to drain directly into the fabric of the wall. Also, I wanted to include this window. It's most exquisite. I don't know any details of it. Now also on the south aisle we've got a medieval window. It's got fragments of medieval stained glass. Now we're outside the church. We've got the south aisle in front of us. We're going to go past the yew tree. And now we've got what is the South Chapel. Now the South Chapel itself is 16th century. And you can see the other side of the Mayflower window. Now this is Henry VII lived 9 years in this century, and Henry VIII would become king. Scotland would invade England, and Thomas Wolsey would be cardinal. Henry actually marries his 6 wives in this century, and the rhyme states, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Henry would go on to order the dissolution of the monasteries. All of the assets and wealth would become the crown's. Henry would become supreme head of the Church of England. Also, Henry would actually be deceased, and Mary Tudor becomes queen in 1553 in the same century. Queen Mary brought back Catholic Mass, and Mary began burning Protestants. 300 were martyred. Also in this century, Queen Elizabeth I was crowned in 1559. We also have the Spanish Armada. England actually began its slave trade in Guinea and West Indies. Elizabeth I sponsors Sir Francis Drake to circumnavigate the world. On returning at the Golden Hind in Deptford, London, the Queen knighted Drake on the ship. We now have the chancel, which is 15th century. We have Henry IV. We have the English Bible is first published. We have Henry V defeats the French at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Joan of Arc, the French maid, leads the army against the English. Joan would become martyred by the English and becomes a saint in 1456. Unbelievably, we have Eton College was founded by Henry VI in 1440. We have the War of the Roses, English Civil War between the House of York and Lancaster for 30 years, and Henry VII defeats Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth. And you can see some of the work that's gone on. You can see still there that the builders would use to put the scaffolding up and work on this structure. So now we're on the north side of the chancel. So originally, just to point out, there used to be 4 trees here, and these were cut down because they were causing structural problems to the church. actually to the, where is it? Yeah. And if you look up there, you can see, I believe that is period window. And then you can see the blocked up priest's doorway. Now if you look, you can see where the oldest part of the church joins on to the chancel, and we're now moving on to a period of 12th century. So disregard this 15th or 16th century window, but you can see the original 12th century lancet window there. So in the 12th century we've got King Henry I ruled for 35 years. He brought peace and legal reform. Henry's nephew Stephen becomes king and goes to war against Henry's daughter Matilda, and you can see the headstones we pointed out in the porch there. Matilda's son becomes king in 1159, Henry II. He's a king of rage and energy. Also at this time we have Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury, is murdered by Henry's knights. Becket becomes a saint. Now Henry died in France soon after. His eldest son becomes king. He would be known as Richard the Lionheart. Richard was constantly on crusade, and he spends little time in England, dying of a crossbow bolt wound in 1109. And this window is from that period. Now we've just crossed the other side of the porch, so you can see how it meanders on. So this is 12th century as well. But what we have here is a 14th century tower, and if you look at the top you can see where the spire or the weather vane actually came down from. Now the 14th century is an incredibly interesting period. We have Edward I, the castle builder. He crowns his own son in 1302. We have William Wallace of Braveheart is captured and executed in Smithfield, London in 1305. 1306, Robert the Bruce is crowned King of Scotland. It's possible that Robert was actually born in Writtle, Chelmsford, Essex, making him an Essex lad. I don't think the Scots would be too happy with that. But his father owned manors in Writtle. In 1310, the Order of the Knights Templar were disbanded. In 1330, this is where things go badly wrong. Harvest foul across England and Europe. 1348, Black Death kills 1/3 of all people across Europe, half the population of England. Now the Jews were accused of the Black Death and they were massacred. In 1377, the 100 Years' War begins between France and England. 1380, the Bible is translated into English. We have 1381, the Peasants Revolt begins 5 miles from here in Brentwood. And in 1386, the first clock to strike hours is installed in Salisbury Cathedral, and it still strikes today. Now, when we're talking of the tower, it has 5 bells. They're not currently working because I think they're structurally unsound. But we do know that we have a 1458 Balcombe of London, a 1724 and a 1731 Thomas Gardner of Sudbury, Suffolk, and an 1814 Thomas II Mears of the Whitechapel. foundry. We've got a fifth bell which is unidentified. So I hope you enjoyed this rather long video on the Church of St Mary Magdalene. It's not often that it's open for such events, so I thought I'd take this opportunity. I understand many of the American friends across the pond may well be curious to see inside this old church. Great Burstead is a very active church in the community, carrying out baptisms, weddings and funerals, and it's got its own choir, I believe, and clubs attached. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you very much.